I can still only sign in with Google. Who hasn't done GitHub authentication for theirs yet? Did every single other person did GitHub authentication? Who did not? Who did not do GitHub authentication? And get it working? Really? Okay, okay. Well, anyway, let's do it real quick. That's impressive. Those clowns in the morning, I don't know what they're doing. Whew. Well, I mean, many of them did, but it was more like half and half. Okay. So back in our Firebase console, under authentication, sign-in method, all I have right now is Google. Let's do GitHub. Really? I enabled this in the afternoon? I don't remember doing this.
Maybe you were like showing us.
Did I?
You did it for us. Yeah, you might have. Yeah, you just clicked enable and then.
Oh, okay. And that's all I did. That's right, because I wanted to show you this thing, right? Because if you look, if you try to copy this, look at that. It drags on one more character. You're going to copy another character. So don't do that. Use their little button. But anyway, the point is you copy and paste this into GitHub. So click Learn More. Let's learn about GitHub. Okay, GitHub, here we go. Handling the sign-in flow. So you have to register your app as a developer application on GitHub. So click that link and it takes us here. So if you don't get here from the Firebase documentation, you get here by going to your settings for your user up in the upper right corner. Settings, developer settings, new OAuth app. So this is Chaturang S2 afternoon. My URL is the URL I'm hosted at. So the one out of here. This URL. Cool. Description, don't need it, so I need that callback URL. This is the thing I copy out of here. So this is so that after it kicks it out to GitHub for authentication, it knows where to kick it back. Register application. Then I get an ID and a secret. ID. Secret. I don't know if those were real ones there that were there or not. Save. And then encode. It's not too bad. I already did this in the morning class, so it's going to already be here. Just do GitHub provider in addition to Google provider. Notice the H is not capitalized in GitHub Auth provider. So we'll export that. So we should also be sure we put this in base.example.js, since that actually gets committed. And then the sign-in component is the only place where we use this. So we're importing Google provider. We'll also import GitHub provider. This handle submit, we're not doing the username password thing, so I'll get rid of handle submit. I'll get rid of my on submit here. We're not using that. So it doesn't really even need to be a form. So here's our Google button. Let's make a GitHub button alongside it. Here we are. So change sign in with Google to sign in with GitHub. Change FA Google to FA GitHub. I bet Font Awesome has a GitHub icon. There we go. So the authenticate method up there just passes in Google provider every time. Instead, let's pass the provider as an argument to authenticate. And then for my Google button, instead of just calling this .authenticate, I'll call an arrow function that calls this .authenticate so I can pass in the Google provider. And on the GitHub button, I'll call an arrow function that calls authenticate, passing in GitHub provider. Also, they look too much alike and they're too close together. So I'm going to change their style a little bit too. So let's put some space between them. Button, margin, I have 0, auto, and then let's do one rim on the bottom so there's some space between. Good. Let's make a second class for GitHub. GitHub : then we don't need the margin bottom on that, I guess. Margin bottom 0. So here it is. So in addition to styles button, on the GitHub button, I will say styles.github. And let's see. GitHub brand colors. Official brand color hex codes. Yeah, where are the hex codes? There you go. GitHub purple. Here we go. So I will make that button background color GitHub purple. Now we're talking. Do it work? Okay, got to authorize it. And it did not explode. But it only didn't explode. Why? Because I already went in here to multiple accounts per email address and changed this to allow that. By default, it does not allow that. So let's show what that looks like. So ordinarily, the first time you try this, come on, you. We are using the, well, it's already created it now. Well, anyway, you may have discovered you had to go in and do this when you first did it, unless I already showed you in class. So that is under authentication sign-in method. Scroll down to advanced, multiple accounts per email address. So keep in mind, if you do this, if you allow multiple accounts for the same email address, this person won't have access to the same direct messages because it's a different UID. So if you're going to do something like this, allow people, the same user, to log in with more than one type of account. You may want to restrict access to things based on email address instead of by UID. Up to you. But if you want them to basically be the same user, regardless of which service they use to sign in, you might want to do your authorization stuff based on email address. Yeah.
Would it be possible to, like, if they try to log in with GitHub but they already have a Google account, you take the GitHub credentials and you walk into Google?
With the same password?
Well, because, like, the Firebase doc says something about handling the error, but...
So you're going to handle the error somehow, but just, like, tell them what the problem is. Let them know that they can't log in because they already have an account with Google. But no, you couldn't do that other thing, because part of the beauty of using this system of the third-party authentication is you never have to deal with that password. It never even goes through your stuff. It goes straight to GitHub or straight to Google, so you never even have to worry about it. You know the difference between authentication and authorization? So when we say auth, it's usually kind of short for both of those things. Authentication is verifying your identity. You are who you say you are. Authorization has to do with which resources you have access to. So authentication is just like logging in. Okay, you are really Dave at davestruce.com. Authorization is saying, okay, you have access to this room. Authentication, authorization, two different things. So we could have multiple services for authentication and still give them access to the same resources if we were using email instead of UID as the basis for our authorization rules. So anyway, just a little vocabulary side note there. Cool. All right, so we added GitHub. Add GitHub authentication.
So there's no like direct messages under the direct message tab?
Right, because they're all scoped by UID. So since I'm not that version of me, even though I have the same email address, that's not how we're determining access. But we could.